speaking of the two talks, God, segues is my thing, I'm telling you. I work my segues. Design system is not only about the problems between product design and engineering, it's also about delightful things. See, I told you about my segues. And how could you systemize in them, you might ask yourself. Do you know what? Ask no more. I want to introduce our next speaker. It's my pleasure to welcome on stage Molly.
How do I work this? Okay, we're good. Everything's good. So hi, my name's Molly Nye. I'm a UI designer on the design system team at Just Eat Takeaway. And now a fact I can tell you about myself, a little icebreaker, if you will, is, so you know Snoop Dogg's rap that he did for a Just Eat advert? I, upon getting this job, decided to learn it in its entirety. So that is a skill I have, and no, I will not be doing it tonight. So I would best describe myself as a UI designer with a knack for bringing products to life using visual storytelling. I've been really fortunate enough to be able to forge a career crafting illustrations and animation and taking brand identity and bringing it into product. So essentially, I am looking after all of the aspects of our design system that make our products more delightful. And as well as being the person that creates these assets, I'm also on the design system team, which means I get to figure out how we bring them into our design system and also how we implement them into product. So I could talk to you all day about this, but I'm going to just focus on two aspects of that today. So illustrations and animation. So as I said, I'm on the design system team at Just Eat. Our design system is called PI. So that stands for Principles for Interfaces and Experiences. It's a bit of a mouthful, pun intended. But before PI and before Just Eat, and even before I was a UI designer, I was actually an artist. I was an artist with very questionable hair choices, with very thin eyebrows, which really dates this photo. And I used my middle name as a surname to be more edgy and more cool. And I went to art school. And I also worked as a face painter on weekends at different theme parks in the UK. This was me in 2010 at Thorpe Park Fright Night after a really busy shift. And probably painting the faces of kids that are now actually starting their career, which is quite horrifying when you think about it. But the first thing you might notice about this is that actually it's really chaotic. And that kind of sums me up, not only as an artist, but as a person, right? I am extremely chaotic and messy. And it's this kind of a stereotype of artists, right? We are really messy and unorganized. We're inconsistent and unpredictable. But we're also visual storytellers, and we're incredibly expressive. Ultimately, we value delight over systems. And the same can be said for the art that we create. Design systems, however, are very much the opposite. So they're incredibly organized, they're consistent and predictable. They solve problems for the users rather than create them. And they tend to prioritize system and usability over delight. So the challenge comes is, how do we take the art, which normally isn't created for design systems, it's usually very large and very chaotic and very messy, and how do we turn that into something that fits nicely in our design system and can be usable? So I want to introduce you to our illustration style, and it's created by a wonderful illustrator called Vicky Garcia. It's kind of made up of large-scale and small-scale illustrations, and what I love most about it is how diverse they are, how they're really delightful. Sorry, my slides are in different orders. So our style guide on our illustrations is made up of our color palette, which is our brand colors. We have like a secondary palette that's only used in illustrations. We have a skin color palette. We have different brushes and different patterns and different textures that really kind of make the illustrations just have so much more depth, and they're so much full of delight. And so when Vicky's contract ended, I took up the pencil, per se, and I started creating illustrations for products. And this is fun for a huge number of reasons, but my favourite is that I got to put my in-jokes into product. So now if you delete your account on Just Eat, you get my soon-to-be husband waving you goodbye with a sad Just Eat balloon. He is thrilled, by the way. So this is our illustration library. It's constantly evolving along with our design system. And we currently have about 259 unique illustrations in product that are created by Vicky, myself, a fantastic new illustrator called Mel, who also works within as a designer on Just Eat. We have the large scale, which there's 144 of those, but then there's ×2 of that for light and dark theme, which I'll get onto a bit more about later. We also have 115 small scale illustrations. And so when building out this library in our design system, I had to really take into consideration lots and lots of different things. But the number one most important thing was the file size and optimization. So each of these illustrations were originally created on a really big Illustrator file, their own Illustrator file, if you will. They were each created to a 1080 by 1080 pixel artboard, and each of them were huge. So even as SVGs, they were massive. This one's about 377 KB, which when you start adding them all into product, really add up and make our app much more slower, much more laggy, and it's something that people just don't want to download. And the reason why it's so big, because I know what you're thinking, SVGs aren't typically massive files, but the reason why this one was so big is because it's full of information. And if you've ever created vectors in Illustrator, you'll know that nodes or anchors kind of mark the different points where the direction turns in the illustration. And this was full of thousands. The reason, by the way, is also both Vicky and myself use drawing tablets to create artwork. And as well as kind of creating a really nice handmade feel within the art, it unfortunately adds a lot more information into the piece. As you can see here with the brushstrokes that were all kind of nicely added, there are thousands of pieces of information in just those tiny brushstrokes. So the challenge began, how do we get this into our design system? And so it started with a manual optimization process that myself and a colleague, Ting Ting, started work on. So we took each of our illustrations and we brought them in to one single AI file to keep them all in one place. And the value of this is pretty much that we have a visual guide of all of our illustrations in one place. This one is specifically just for the large light scale ones. And then, as well as that, we resize them to 200 by 200 pixels. It means that we can export them all at once, which is great. And I also separated the background from the illustrations, which meant that I could toggle that on and off as I exported them. So, as we see here, we have the original brushstroke ones, and then the ones that I created. Now, I really, 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 really wanted to preserve the brushstrokes of these illustrations because I felt that's where a lot of the character was. And so what I first did to try and manually optimize these assets is go in and kind of try and combine shapes and kind of reduce the nodes that way. I really didn't want to touch the brushstrokes in any way. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get the file down enough, and so I had to touch the brushstrokes. And so the way I handled this was by creating a new brush in Illustrator that was smooth, so it didn't have all of those different nodes or pieces of information. And I then went through each illustration one by one, and I redrew all of the line work for each one. And it brought it down quite considerably. So now we have all of our illustrations at 200 by 200 pixels, which also, I forgot to say, we kind of worked with our engineers on this, and they felt that 200 by 200 pixels was probably the best size for in product. And then this one particularly got down to 49 KB, which is a massive reduction. And we also, I further got this down another 10 to 20%, just by pushing it through a online SVG optimizer as well. So, I'm going to take a drink. Sorry, my throat this morning is not great. Should we use SVGs or PNGs? And now we obviously use SVGs for in product, but the question remains, what should we use in our Figma files? And you're probably saying, well, obviously it should be SVGs, that would make more sense. And you're not wrong, we use it for all of our iconography, we use it for our logos as well. It would make sense, surely, that we would use SVGs. Well, unfortunately, oh, interesting. Okay, I'm going to explain something that's happened here that's really weird. So originally the file, so I tried to recreate, what you see on this side is the bug that I was trying to recreate. And then somehow the bug actually happened on the other side, which is really interesting. But basically, that's not supposed to happen. Everything is supposed to be very much contained within the shape. I don't know what's happened there. I assume, however this has been looked at, the clipping mask has failed. But basically, the reason why this happens is because in Illustrator, when you bring these into Figma, Figma can't read the clipping mask that we use in Illustrator. And so all of these patterns that are contained in a mask are uncontained, essentially. I thought Figma fixed this, and so I was trying to recreate it, and apparently I didn't need to do that. So I should have just brought a PNG in for the first. But the other main reason that I didn't want to bring vectors into Figma is because with designers, or designers using our design system, it feels a lot sometimes like we're kind of herding cats. It's a futile attempt to control that which is inherently uncontrollable. And what I mean by that is when you bring an SVG into Figma, you have all of these different vector shapes, which are shapes that can be easily manipulated. They can be recolored, they can be moved around. They can essentially be uncontrollable. And so, oh, it's doing it again, love. And so what this means is that you could potentially take parts of an illustration and move them around or recolor them and essentially dilute the brand identity and also get brand really angry at me. And so we use PNGs for our design system library, much more control, much easier to work around. And we have a big banner at the top that says Pi illustration exports, SVGs, can all be found in the Pi illustrations repository. And unfortunately, this banner sits at the top and it hasn't stopped all developers from exporting it from Figma and then messaging me and asking why it doesn't work. So what about dark theme? So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we have obviously light theme and dark theme. And it makes sense that when our illustrations were created, dark theme wasn't necessarily something that was being thought about, because when Vicky created these illustrations, she created them not just for product, but for all sorts of areas in our business. So these illustrations are used in decks, they're used in our office, they're used pretty much everywhere, not only product. But we definitely felt that we needed a dark theme variant, and the quickest way of us doing this without too much hassle was to essentially take our source of truth file that we created in Illustrator and bring it through into a new file, which we then call dark theme, and quickly grab all of our backgrounds and change them to our token equivalent or dark theme token equivalent of what we used for the light theme. And that was just the quickest way of us doing it. What I will say is that engineering decided that actually the best way of handling this would be a one-to-one swap. So we would take our light illustrations and swap it out with a dark illustration. It wouldn't be a token switch. And then in Figma, obviously we're using PNGs, and we brought those in, and we use it a bit like a component. So we have a toggle to switch it between light and dark, and this just means that designers can pull in those illustrations and then toggle it between the different themes. So the fourth was using illustrations. And again, I said earlier that Designers using the design system are a bit like herding cats. Again, a futile attempt to control that which is inherently uncontrollable. And so a way for us to control this was to look at documentation. And I think out of all the documentation that we have in our design system, our illustration guidelines really do come with the most warnings and the most disclaimers. But I just wanted to pull out some bits of our documentation that I thought were really cool. So the first is we have a hierarchy of content. This basically tells designers that they should be using photography first and foremost, then using iconography, and then using illustration last. And this is basically to guide designers to use illustration as kind of the least important element on the screen. And a lot of designers love using illustrations and they kind of overuse them. So we wanted to really dial back on that. We also set like a scaling guide. So we have our small scale illustrations and our large scale illustrations. And we basically set a guide to use them at different sizes. So our small can be used at a 64 pixels up until about 140, and then you go to a large, and that can be used up to about 500 pixels. And then, interesting. Sorry, I realised that none of the clipping is working, and it looks terrible, so we're just going to ignore all of that. But we move. We also had the visual do's and don'ts, where we basically showed the best way of using illustrations along with our other components, and also using illustrations side by side with each other or in combination with each other. Our fifth consideration was making illustrations available. And going back to this banner in the Pi illustration exports, I did mention we have a Pi illustrations repository. And now it used to be that we had a Google Drive with all of our illustrations inside. But we've since transferred to a GitHub repository, which is way more effective and way more brilliant. And essentially, this is our Pi illustrations repository that both iOS and Android currently pull from. And we're still trying to get web to jump on board. But just say we can make a change on this repository to one of the illustrations. It means that wherever this illustration is within product, it will update automatically, which is fantastic. And the engineers also taught us designers how to do it. So we can jump on and do a little bit of feeling like an engineer, which is great. We also have a change log. So if we make a change to an illustration or we add a new one, we'll make those changes and record that in this change log. And that's just to keep engineers informed about what's going on. A lot of the time, it's just kind of good to know. Or it might kind of let them know that they need to review something in the repository. So our current process looks a little bit like this. We have, if sometimes it's a product manager or sometimes it's a designer, we'll request an illustration. Then we'll go through and we'll create it. We'll get it signed off by brand. We'll go through an optimization process, and then we'll put that in Figma and also the repository. And it just means that we have a really streamlined flow for how illustrations are handled in our design system. And so I just wanted to bring up another piece of work that I kind of did as kind of a fun project. I call this the Jet Avatar Generator, and honestly, I just did this for a bit of fun, because I'm a geek like that. But essentially, I wanted to see what would happen if we pulled in our illustrations and kind of use them as we do components. So essentially, I created a mini design system, and I drew out all of these different hairstyles and faces and beards and clothes, and I brought in all of our color palettes, and I pulled that all together into one image. And the outcome was basically creating different personalized illustrations with different diverse characters that could be really quickly changed and updated. And honestly, this hasn't really had much use in product. I tend to use it for decks or personas. If anyone needs a quick illustration in our brand style of a person, we have it. And it just is a fun way of me creating kind of all of our team members, actually. I've also used this as my Slack photo for like 2 years. But I guess the reason I wanted to bring it up was because I think it kind of opens up a conversation for how we can use design systems and use tools like Figma to kind of create creative assets as we do components and really kind of open up the possibilities for how we use illustrations. So what about animated illustrations? Because I did promise there were some animations in here also. This is a really fun project I worked on. It's the after order flow animations on Just Eat, and it's one of the most fun projects I've been lucky to work on. For all of our animated illustrations, we use something called Lottie. Lottie, I don't know if you've used it or if you haven't, but essentially it's a tool that allows us to create smaller files to be used in product. And it's a really, really great entry tool if you're creating animations in product. The only problem that I have with it is that sometimes Lottie doesn't always allow or doesn't always support After Effects in certain ways. So there's a lot of things you can do on Lottie, but there's a lot of things you can't do. One of those is rigging. You can't rig on After Effects, which means that if I'm doing character illustrations and animations, it sometimes feels a little bit robotic compared to what I could do if I used rigging. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the end-to-end process on how I create animations from our illustration library. And it kind of starts back with this original AI file, the source of truth, if you will, because obviously to make any animated illustrations, we need to have an optimized file to do that. And so one of the benefits of having this file ready to go is that I can take any of these and try and animate them. And I can do it a lot quicker than if I was doing it from scratch. So what I'll do is I'll bring out one of those animated illustrations and I'll pull it into its own file. I'll then separate it on its based by its layers, and it will really depend on how I want it to animate. So I might kind of separate a hand and separate a foot, or separate different people, or the disco ball, or the bag. And then I bring that into After Effects, and I won't go through all of what I do to kind of animate, but essentially I get it to a point that I'm really happy with. This one in particular, I used two different animations within one. So you have like a transition, which is like the big entry moment. So for this one, this appears when the order is delivered and you're like really celebrating that moment. And then it plays on a gentle loop afterwards, so until the user will close that part of the app. And then I'll export that using a tool called Body Moving. The G is silent. And pull all of that into Lottie. And Lottie is really great for one particular thing, and that's kind of organizing all of my animations. So we have splash screens in product. We have about 18 different localized splash screens. So different languages of did somebody say, and then also different markets. And this is a really great way of just housing all of those and kind of keeping track of them. We obviously also, every time there's a holiday, like a Valentine's Day, or sometimes we'll do like Champions League content as well. It's a way of keeping track of all of those because I have to do like 18 versions every single time I do something new in there. And of course, I'll add it to documentation. So I'll bring in a GIF of how it should look for easy handover to development. I'll mark where the transition markers are and the looping markers. I'll give like an overview. I'll link out to our Lottie files. Yeah, I'll just make it really easily available to engineers so that they know where everything is. And finally, also in that Google file, I'll add still animations. And this is essentially just an illustration, right? But it's supposed to capture a bit more movement within our animated illustrations. So I've kind of put a bit more information in there than I would a typical illustration. And we use this for, as well as, emails and other pieces of content. We also use it for accessibility reasons. So if someone turns off or turns on reduced motion settings in their phone, they will see this instead of the actual animation. And so to kind of bring it all back together, we're still constantly looking at different ways of systemizing motion, and we're looking at different tools at the moment for how to do that. And maybe it's Lottie. Lottie Labs has come out recently, and there's lots of really cool things and features that we can do with that. There's also Figma. and keeping it local to Figma. And there's also a new tool called Rive that we're currently just exploring a little bit, which is kind of the next kind of big motion tool on the block. But you never know, in a couple of years I might be talking about a completely different tool because there's stuff coming out all the time, and hopefully in a couple of years you'll see me doing another talk about Systemising Delight that talks way more about motion and way more about how things have advanced in like the last few years. So thanks for listening. My name's Molly Nye, and you can find me on LinkedIn using Molly India Nye. And if you want to check out our design system, you can just go to pi.design. Hi.
I just surprised her by saying, come and join me. She had no idea this was going to happen. But I thought it would be weird, both of us standing over there when we have chairs. So we might as well take a seat. So do we have any, well, first of all, fantastic talk. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Do we have any questions for Molly? Any comments? Don't all go at once. Everyone calm down, hold back. This is not really a question. This is more of a, I think when you and I chatted, I got really excited about this because we have in our team, we've actually tried to kind of break down our illustrations. And I've got people from marketing here, and I love them, and they are always asking us for help, and we try to make as much as we can. But actually, it can be quite difficult sometimes to create things, illustrations, and that kind of thing quickly.
Yeah.
So we did exactly that. We looked at our illustrations, and we started breaking them down into different, kind of like a component, and create a mini design system to help us create illustrations faster. Mm-hmm. I think what I find a bit challenged with that is that I was worried that we ended up... My concern was that they will look too similar, and they were kind of like, people will start realizing that this bit is the same bit as over here, and they're a bit too like, how have you worked around to ensure that you don't lose the art integrity in this?
Well, to be honest, I think that when we look at illustrations, it's kind of an industry standard that we reuse things. Like if you look at animation, like Disney will always reuse frames of animation, and no one really notices. And even in the illustrations that we create, I'm constantly going over older illustrations and then kind of drawing over it and doing it in a different way, adding slight differences, and no one's really noticed. So I don't really know what to say to that except for...
Keep doing it.
Keep doing it, yeah.
Maybe it's one of those things that you think about it because you're creating it, but other people don't.
I think that's probably it, yeah.
I love the Disney example. It's like when you realize that it's the same bear in Bunny. It was like, exactly. I'll just like, what?
Everyone does it, so just also do it. It's fine.
Okay, well, in that case, for those people on my team that are here, let's just keep doing that. Don't do it too much. That was... Sorry? I don't know. I didn't hear what she's saying. I have no idea. It's like, it's a long process. It takes a really long time. Yeah, but that's exactly why we did it, because we had people wanting more illustration. Yes, absolutely. We got two people. Let's start with you over there.
So I saw that you have splash screen, 18 of them. That is crazy in itself, like creating different splash screens for an app. In terms of how to justify that, in terms of like we need to spend so much hours in building 18 splash screens, how do you put a number or how do you justify this spending hours on it?
Yeah, well, I guess, so the other thing is obviously we have landscape, and so for landscape we also have versions for that. We tend to not use the did somebody say text on landscape because it's just too much fiddling around, and we just use the house. We are having more and more conversations about potentially simplifying it because it's quite a lot to deal with. But also, I guess it does add like an element of delight. I'm going to say that a lot. Because obviously, whether you're in Spain, we have an Irish version. We have, all these different languages in different countries. And there's something quite nice about going on there and seeing, did somebody say in your language? I guess it gets trickier because we have also different localizations for different countries. So obviously in countries like Switzerland, where you're using like German and French, it's kind of opens up the how do we work out what region we're going to put those in. Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of. I'm glad that I have Lottie to do that. I guess a way of making that easier for myself is I tend to use a lot of compositions. So in After Effects, you can create compositions and then I kind of just reuse those compositions. So actually it's not as much work as it looks. I have the house logo and the way it zooms out kind of already pre-made with also the did somebody say text. And sometimes it's just about adding additional elements and recreating them. And honestly, it's not the longest thing in the world.
Excellent, thank you. We have over here, yes, please.
Hi, thanks, Molly. Yeah, really, really good and really delightful. I guess my question was, in a design system world where Figma's the tool, Storybook is typically the tool for engineers, introducing Rive or Lottie or Illustrator is kind of maybe a new concept for some design systems. How have you kind of overcome challenges when it comes to getting people familiar with yet another tool and how to use it and how to export and, well, not export from Figma, but yeah, just get familiar with them?
Yeah, I guess different tools are going to be used by different people. So I would never have like an engineer necessarily dive into Illustrator. I think they would freak out at me. But I guess for other designers who might want to also do that, I think I have to rely quite a bit on enthusiasm. So like we're looking at Rive as a tool at the moment, and we talked to them and had a really great demo with them. And so basically they were kind of saying that it's getting the enthusiasm of other designers, other engineers, people that want to like learn new tools, because not everyone is going to be on board. But there are people that are really interested in learning new tools. And I guess that is kind of a problem with, having all of these different tools. And there has to be some kind of like bringing it all together. And to be honest, it's something we're still working out, and I think it's going to continue to be like a talking point. I think it's not a problem, but I think it's a struggle in like any company, because you have so many great tools, right, that create so many cool things, and you don't want to just ditch one because the adoption rate isn't great. Probably wasn't the best way of answering, but still.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more if there's any. Oh, I think the lady in white.
I'll just shout it out.
Okay.
How did you manage transitioning to GitHub?
Interesting. So luckily we have really, really fantastic engineers who created a Confluence doc for us, which is a step-by-step guide. And I'm forever grateful for that. Also, I can just be like, hello, please help. I think I did something wrong. And they'll be like, okay, have you followed the doc? And I'm like, and then they'll be like, follow the doc.
Of course I have.
Remember to follow the doc, okay. But no, they are great and they answer lots of questions and they're really patient, and the documentation, when I do read it, is fantastic. So it was a bit of a learning curve, but it's...
Mind sharing it?
I don't know if I can. Don't know. I'll get back to you on that. Come see me after.
It's like the reverse that normally is in design system. It's normally we who tell them, have you read it in documentation? I did say the last question, but you actually had your hand up as well, so this is definitely the last one.
Can I say a few words about how you define the best art direction for your illustration?
What was that, sorry?
Sorry, can we get the microphone over there, please? Sorry, not your fault.
Thanks a lot. Can you say a few words about how you define your process to define the best art direction for your illustration?
I mean, as I said earlier, this style was created by a wonderful illustrator called Vicky Garcia, and I essentially kind of work with her to mirror what is essentially her style and our jet style. I guess it's kind of a different question because obviously as an artist I kind of have my own processes, but I wouldn't say that I'm using them here. It's hard to answer, but if you want to catch me later, I might be able to answer it better in a more personal way, I guess. Sorry, that didn't really answer it. Thanks.
But I think that, very quickly, I think that's a fair point, though, because it's a system, right?
Yeah.
And it's a illustration style that is part of a brand. Whatever you're doing in a systemizing way, or whether you're taking someone else's brand, you ultimately sort of, there is a give, you have to give something away from your artistic, from you being an artist, because you have to follow the brand. So there is But it's a different type of artistry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All art's art.
Yeah. Okay, that's all we have time for now. Delightful, I would say. Sorry. Thank you so much.
Thank
it was
you.
an absolute pleasure. Big round of applause.